GM. GM. So today is Wednesday, 12th of June. And heading into the FOMC, Bitcoin is starting to rally, as is pretty normal and expected. We had the usual selling pre-FOMC. So we had selling from Friday night or Friday afternoon all the way until yesterday. And we're seeing a reaction now as price starts to climb up, fill in some of this gap. I think that this general area up here is the most important resistance on the chart on low time frames. Depending what happens with inflation and FOMC, you'll see the next big move. I do think there's a big move coming today. I don't think it will be directional and sustained, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the highs taken out. I don't think the lows will, unless there's really bad inflation number or there's something bad from Powell at the press conference. I think the market has fully flipped itself into short-term fear since Friday. And if we're going to go anywhere, it's probably going to be up. You might see a sharp move like that. But I think it would take the highs and initially, and then end up just back into more of a chop. Reason for this, and it's not like I'm even directly going to trade it this way, is that we've moved from one extreme to the other. So throughout this consolidation, we moved from the extreme at the highs all the way to the lows, failed to go lower, came back inside. So unless it rejects off the midpoint, which is around the red zone, then it's probably going to go swiftly to the highs. Not because price is even bullish. I expect the positioning to be quite extreme going into the FOMC. We had more ETF outflows yesterday. We had a zero from BlackRock. That's to be expected. Talked about it last week. It's the arbitrage, the basis trade rolling off. I think the ETF flows themselves are either misunderstood or just not being used accurately at all. I don't think that super high inflow days mean that much. I don't think super high outflow days mean that much. Not unless you're looking at what is funding rate doing and what is the CME futures basis. Those things I've talked about a bunch. So let's see how the market's positioned going into FOMC. Trade of the day, I'll talk about specific trades. So funding rate has really cooled off. But a lot of people talk about funding rate not being an accurate predictor anymore because there's so much basis trading going on and there's Athena with all the build up. I mean, Athena's not that big. So first of all, the Athena stuff is quite dumb. If you look at the Athena dashboard, in total, there is 760, 304. There's 1.5 billion on Athena, on Bitcoin, right? If you're looking here, the notional. We're just looking at Bitcoin. So what people are saying is, even though funding rate's low, that is artificially suppressed by Athena because Athena's digital dollar, the way it works is they buy spot and they short futures to create a synthetic dollar, right? But that's 1.5 billion out of the 19.8 billion. So it's not even 10%. It's about 7% of the total OI on perpetuals. So I don't think that it's not insignificant, but I don't think that it's the be all and end all. Which is just to say, when people are telling you, the funding rate lowering is not a good thing, it always has been, and it still is. But let's take away Athena. Let's look at altcoins, excluding Bitcoin and ETH. Altcoin funding rate is 0.0066, excluding Bitcoin and ETH. And Bitcoin and ETH are the only ones here that are included. So, clearly, there has been a flush out of leverage. There's been a reset of positioning. And if we look at altcoins, and I'll put on this funding back to, I want to include Ethereum. So, Bitcoin's open interest remains high. We still have this build up. Even throughout the sell-offs, there's no budge in this. So, directionally, there's going to be a massive move. Now, you can't predict ahead of time what way that's going to go. I think a lot of it is going to be dictated by the Fed's decision today. Do they cut rates? I'm thinking purely from a betting perspective, it's a bit like the unexpected Ethereum ETF, where the odds were so low that it was a plus EV bet. Probably the same for rate cuts. So a lot of people are saying that you look at the Fed Watch tool, which is only an estimate. It's not supposed to be an exact representation of the odds, but the Fed Watch tool says almost certainly there will be no rate cut. That's what this means. Okay? But there's one key piece of data that hasn't come out yet, which is the inflation numbers, which comes out just before the Fed meet to discuss interest rates, or before they announce it. So it depends. The way I view it is the Fed already has a decision whether they're going to cut or not. That decision is almost certainly that they're not going to cut. Because if there was any insider or any hope, any kind of insider information, the odds wouldn't be 99.5% or whatever. But I think it's still on the table, depending on what the inflation numbers do, that there could be a surprise cut. The only reason for a surprise cut would be political. And I think this is something that the market is maybe not appreciating fully. But Joe Biden's having a horrendous week. In the polls, he's falling further behind. Trump is just getting more and more popular, even with the convictions. And, most importantly, Biden shit himself on stage. No, it wasn't the most important thing that happened this week. But symbolically, yeah. At an event, he wasn't able to speak. He literally couldn't speak. And he's getting crushed. And make no doubt, the Fed are political, and Powell absolutely. Even though Powell's a Republican, Powell is Biden's lapdog and wants Biden in. Because Trump has already said, right? Trump's already said in interviews, he will fire Powell if he gets in. He's already pre-positioning the blame against Powell. He's trying to say that since I got voted out, or well, as he would say, since the election was stolen from me, that Powell and Biden together have destroyed America. That's the narrative he's painting. Even though it was him who put Powell in and kept Powell in throughout his term. Since he left, Powell has done a lot of stuff for Biden, and Trump now wants to position himself as using Powell as a scapegoat and saying, when I get back in, we're going to cut rates and we're going to get rid of Powell, we're going to pro-business, pro-markets, all that kind of stuff. So, just think about any power structure. If you're a politician or you're a Fed chair or you're whatever, if you're in power, you want it to stay that way. The number one thing they have in mind is self-preservation. And he knows that if Biden stays in, his odds of surviving are higher. Simple. He knows if Trump comes in, he probably loses. He's probably gone. So even though the Fed will tell you they're not political, they obviously are political, and they obviously will give in to pressure if it's strong enough. Why would rate cuts be needed? Rate cuts will give a big boost to the market and to many of the people who are protesting against Biden and saying that rate cuts are needed and rates are too high, and look at the central banks. So Canada have already cut rates, the ECB, Europe have already cut rates. So there's precedent there. If the Fed were to cut rates today, it wouldn't look out of the ordinary because other central banks are doing it, and you could say, oh, this is just the way we're going. And if so, that would really moon the markets. Just from a from a perspective of intraday, I don't know. I feel extremely bullish. Just from a setup. Unless we go below 67, right? Unless we start to go below 67 and start closing below there on a 4-hour basis, I just see this as being a typical FOMC day where you see volatility in both directions, but then probably a big move, and it's probably a big move up just because positioning. I don't know exactly how all this open interest is positioned for BTC, but I do know that funding rate has been declining, spot premium is back, right, and price is rising. So it's been a long time since we saw that. It's been a perp premium all the way through here. People were long and they stayed long and they kept getting long. And now, just as the premium flips back to spot, which is generally bullish if price is trending up, and the funding rate has gone below neutral, everyone is now suddenly bearish. What a shock. So, not feeling bearish here at all, intraday. But from a higher time frame perspective, let me finish with this. Where's the chart? Have I got it open? The aggregated chart. All right. This is the very, very, very simple volume profile that has been treating me well throughout all of this consolidation. It's helped me trade it on my day trades. It's helped me frame the bias here. It's working beautifully well because it just deals with objective levels. And Bitcoin has two areas to watch. First of all, needs to flip 72K to go to all-time highs. Very simple. That hasn't happened yet. We can go all the way up to 71, 71 and a half and still not be high time frame bullish, just be consolidating. But also, trying to break down, you've got the value area of this entire consolidation, of which Bitcoin is towards the top end. It's trying to hold around the point of control, which if it does is a good sign. There's a nice deep wick below, which represents a failure to break below the support and the daily market structure, which I've marked with that black line. And if it's going to go down to 63, 62, it's really simple. Once we trade into this area here, I think it goes pretty quickly down to there. Until then, this is actually holding, and a move through to the other end of the value area is most likely. I don't know if we break out to new all-time highs. That would need something like the Fed cut. If the Fed cuts, I think Bitcoin goes for all-time highs this month. If the Fed doesn't cut, I think we see some kind of squeeze and chop, and we could go down. And it depends what Powell says after that as well. So that's Bitcoin heading into FOMC. Make sure you don't miss trade of the day, where I'll talk about the exact trading of it. Now, Ethereum is really weak. Like, this is awful. For me, people talk about 3,500 holding on Ethereum. Not for me. 3,580 has been that pivot level. You can see price respecting it, price holding it, price closing down below it. There is absolutely nothing bullish here about Ethereum when it's below the June open. So let's keep that as a really simple level. ETH needs to flip its monthly open to have any bullishness in June. If not, it's going to go lower or it's going to chop. I think this is as simple as people get too long ETH, thinking it was an easy trade. There's no easy trades in the market. If you remember what I've said for over a year now, there's no ETH BTC outperformance until the bands go green. The bands are not green yet, And whenever the ETH news came out, all the people who'd shit on ETH all year just said, oh, guess ETH's bullish now, and everyone just started to get long ETH. It's not like that. You can't just do that. Will ETH go higher? Yes. I'm sure ETH will. But it looks like the same thing again. People have gotten themselves too over-allocated into something that they did not have good positioning in before. And it's just going to bleed them. So with ETH though, I think that the most likely path for ETH is not to fill in the entire gap. I don't think that'll happen. But depending on how it moves here, if we get a bad FOMC, probably backtest off those bands, down lower, and chop around like that. I wouldn't be surprised to see a higher low form like that. I don't think it'll come all the way back down, unless Bitcoin wipes to 62. If Bitcoin goes 62, ETH's going back to 3K. But you have to remember the ETH ETF is coming. It's only a matter of time, and that will give it a positive catalyst whenever that time comes. What you're just misinterpreting here is bad positioning. Good to be long ETH here, bad to get long ETH here, because you missed out on that entire repricing. So I think chop. I talked about this as well. I thought it would actually go higher first, but it didn't. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on one of the streams, you can find it, that it would take out 4K, and then I thought it would go for one more push, find its way back into this area here, and that's the place to buy it. ETH is coming to the exact place you want to buy it. This happens over and over again. It just means we get too far ahead of ourselves and it comes back for some kind of a retest, right? Back into an area where the impulse developed from. ETH moving up, impulsed higher here. People get themselves all excited, comes back, forms a higher low right towards the impulse, right? And many examples of it here. So ETH moved up, rallied up here. There was a gap left. People got overly excited, flushed them into a higher low. Away it goes. Same thing over here. Broke away, left a gap, 3 big green days. Distributed, back down, higher low, and on it goes. So I don't see why this would be any different to where it could fill in the entire gap or part of the gap, but just form some kind of higher low. It's probably going to take a bit of time. So keep an eye on that. And on trade of the day, I'll break down exactly how to trade around today's FOMC and the CPI, GM.